The sun rose gently over Oak Ridge, casting a soft golden hue across the quiet streets of the small Midwestern town. The morning fog lingered in patches, curling around fences and drifting through old oak trees like ghosts with nowhere left to haunt. It was the kind of town where time didn't rush, it simply ambled along, polite and predictable. Michael Hayes was already awake. He stood outside his modest home at the edge of town, coffee mug in hand, dressed in a faded olive green military jacket that looked like it had survived more than just weather. His long, dark hair was tied loosely at the nape of his neck, the light morning breeze stirring a few strands loose against the square lines of his face, sharp-weathered and quietly handsome in that way life rarely preserved. From his porch he could see everything: the old gas station down the road, the church bell tower peeking above the tree line, and the school bus stop half a block away, where children were beginning to gather with their jackets and backpacks. Michael's eyes settled there, not on the kids, but on his daughter Sarah. Sarah Hayes stood with her backpack slung over one shoulder, hair pulled into a lazy braid. At 15, she had the same calm composure as her father and the bright eyes of her late mother. She chatted softly with a few friends, but her gaze flicked back toward the house every few seconds, seeking the reassurance of her father's silent presence. He raised his coffee in salute. She smiled and turned back to her friends. Michael exhaled deeply but silently, as if releasing something he never quite got rid of, memories that surfaced too easily in the quiet. He had known noise all his life: the chaos of Delta Force missions, the shouting of combat zones, the sound of gunmetal against sand and bone. Silence now was a discipline, hard-earned and fragile. Within this silence, something else had begun to bloom: a life of simplicity, of fixing old cars in his garage, of Sunday dinners with Sarah, of reading paperbacks on the porch. It was not the life he'd imagined after war, but perhaps it was the life that had imagined him. Sleep never came easy. This morning had been the same: waking in cold sweat, his wife's face fading from a dream. Sarah had been just 10 when the call came. He'd been thousands of miles away in some classified hellhole when his commanding officer pulled him aside. Car accident, instant, nothing could have been done. He'd completed the mission anyway, 48 more hours of pure mechanical function before they extracted him. By the time he made it home, they'd already buried her. His daughter's eyes had looked at him like he was a stranger, and in many ways he had been. The rumble of the approaching school bus broke his thoughts. As it slowed to a stop near the corner, a new figure stepped off. A girl, slender shoulders slightly hunched as if she had learned to shrink herself on purpose. Long brown hair draped like a curtain across her face, which peeked out nervously from beneath. Michael's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in that way only those who had seen too much tend to look. He wasn't watching her like a neighbor. He was assessing danger, an old habit that never quite died. The girl hesitated near the sidewalk, glancing left and right like someone unfamiliar with being watched. The other kids didn't greet her. A few whispered, some giggled, but Sarah noticed. She stepped forward and gave a small smile. The girl returned it tentatively. Michael nodded almost imperceptibly, then sipped his coffee again. New kid, he muttered to himself. He'd seen it before, the way small towns welcome strangers not with warmth but with observation. Acceptance would come later, maybe if the newcomer passed the unspoken tests. He turned to go back inside but paused. There it was again, that feeling, the hair on the back of your neck instinct that had never left him, not even after years away from combat. He looked back toward the bus stop. The new girl was standing just a little too far from the others, a little too exposed, the way prey learns to stand before it realizes it is prey. Michael said nothing, but he watched longer than usual. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher, Oak Ridge buzzed into its usual rhythm. Lawn sprinklers clicked on shopkeepers, unlocked doors, retirees filled the diner's corner booths, and in the auto repair shop behind his house, Michael was elbow deep in the underbelly of a '72 Chevy pickup. His hands were blackened with grease, but his mind wandered to the girl, the way she walked, the way the other kids had shifted subtly to avoid her without even realizing they were doing it. It was the kind of thing you only noticed if you'd spent enough time on the edges yourself. He wiped his hands and turned on the old radio in the corner, letting classic rock roll through the garage like a memory. "Dad," Sarah's voice called from the front door. He stepped outside and saw her coming up the driveway, backpack bouncing. "How was school?" he asked. She shrugged. "Same as always." He tilted his head. "You say that every day." She hesitated. There's a new girl, Emma. She's quiet but nice. He looked at her for a moment. Kids being kind. Sarah's eyes lowered. Not really. Jason and his friends were already messing with her, calling her names. Michael's jaw tightened slightly. Did she say anything? She just kind of took it, but I sat with her at lunch. He nodded slowly. Good. Sarah looked up. You always say to stand up for what's right, even if it's small. Michael didn't smile, but something flickered behind his eyes. That's right, even if it's small. That night after Sarah had gone to bed, Michael sat on the porch again. The stars above Oak Ridge shone clear, unburdened by city lights. He cradled a different mug, now something stronger than coffee, and leaned back in his chair. He didn't know the girl's story yet, didn't know what wounds she carried or why she looked like she'd already learned to protect herself from the world. But he recognized the signs. He had seen them in combat. He had seen them in himself. Something told him that trouble hadn't knocked for the last time. Not yet. Emma Anderson had always been good at hiding. It wasn't something she'd learned in a classroom. It was something life had taught her through repetition. The quiet glances, the whispers behind doors, the slammed car doors, and late-night arguments. She had mastered the art of invisibility, not by choice, but by necessity. And now here she was, new town, new school, new attempt at starting over. The Oak Ridge High School building looked like every other school she had ever walked into. Red bricks, faded flags flickering. Hallway lights and linoleum floors that echoed footsteps a little too loudly. But here everything also smelled of earth and wood smoke, the kind of place where people stayed forever or never truly belonged. Emma tugged at the sleeves of her oversized sweater as she walked toward the front office, her boots making soft thuds against the floor. Her eyes flicked toward the bulletin board homecoming posters, Bible Club flyers, lost dog notices, and then to a framed photo of last year's baseball team. Every face looked like it had grown up together. Every smile looked permanent. At the front desk, a secretary with big hair and thin patience handed her a schedule and a laminated ID. Locker 247, homeroom's down the hall. You're in Mr. Delane's English class, first period, she said without looking up. Try not to get lost, and welcome to Oak Ridge. Emma murmured a thank you and turned to go. The first few classes were a blur of introductions and stares. No one said much. A few students leaned over to whisper as she passed. She didn't hear the words, but she knew the tone, curious, judgmental, dismissive. In third period, as she walked into biology, she heard it more clearly. Is that the CEO's kid from Chicago? Looks like a sad puppy. I heard her dad's some big shot who got caught doing something shady, another voice added. She sat down without reacting. Her deskmate turned to her, a girl with clear skin and kind eyes. Don't let them get to you, the girl said. They're idiots. That was all. No names exchanged, no comfort given beyond a transactional truth. Emma didn't expect more. Lunch was worse. She stood in the middle of the cafeteria, holding her tray, scanning the room. Every table was claimed tribes formed long ago, football players, theater kids, cheerleaders, gamers, and then a table with Jason Hale at the center, surrounded by boys who looked like they shaved for fun and girls who laughed like they'd already peaked in life. Jason was tall, with messy blonde hair and the lean, cocky walk of someone who had never heard the word no. He leaned back in his seat like a king holding court. When his eyes landed on Emma, he smirked and whispered something to the guy next to him. They all laughed. Emma lowered her head and walked toward the far corner of the room where the vending machines hummed softly and a light flickered overhead. She sat alone, picking at her food, pretending not to care. A moment later, someone sat down across from her. Mind if I join you? Asked a soft voice. Emma looked up. It was Sarah Hayes, the girl who'd smiled at the bus stop. She had a kind face and wore a plaid shirt tucked into jeans, her sleeves rolled up like someone who didn't need attention to be strong. Her brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her eyes were alert, kind, and curious. I'm Sarah. You're Emma, right? Sarah asked. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. My dad said you got off the bus this morning, looking like you wanted to run. Emma blinked, surprised. Your dad? Michael Hayes, the guy who watches everything from his porch. He's kind of famous on our block, not that he talks to anyone. Sarah added, he likes cars more than people, but he's cool. Emma found herself smiling a little. I'm glad you sat down. I'm glad you didn't tell me to leave, Sarah replied. For the first time all day, Emma laughed softly. But it was real. As lunch continued, Emma relaxed. Sarah talked about teachers to avoid local traditions and the fact that the town's fall festival had a pie-eating contest that got way too competitive. She didn't ask questions that were too personal. She didn't dig. She just talked. Still, when Sarah finally asked, "So what brought you here?" Emma's shoulders stiffened. "My mom wanted a quieter place," she said carefully. "After everything with, you know." Sarah nodded, not pushing. Emma glanced around the room. Jason was still watching her. "They don't like outsiders much here, do they?" Sarah looked down at her tray. "Not at first, but it gets better." Emma wasn't sure she believed that. After school, as students spilled into the parking lot and buses lined the curb, Emma walked beside Sarah toward the stop. "You can sit with me tomorrow," Sarah offered. "I'd like that," Emma said. Then they both noticed Jason leaning against a pickup truck, arms crossed. He wasn't alone. Two of his friends flanked him, grinning like hyenas, his eyes locked on Emma with a predator's interest, casual but calculating. "Careful," Sarah whispered. "He thinks he owns the school." Emma kept walking. Jason called out, "Hey, new girl, Chicago right? Bet that CEO mom of yours thinks she's hot shit coming to our town." His friend snorted. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't stop, but her hand tightened around the strap of her backpack. Sarah said nothing, but her eyes were sharp, watching. Jason grinned satisfied with his little jab and turned away. Emma said nothing, but a quiet voice inside her whispered something new. "They're not going to break you." Not this time. That evening, alone in her room, Emma sat at the desk by the window. Outside, the trees swayed gently. The streets were calm, peaceful. She looked down at the small box on her desk. Inside were old photos, her parents, her dog, a note she had written to herself the night they packed up and left Chicago. "You're stronger than you look." She closed the box and stared out into the dusk. And across the street on the porch of the house with the olive green truck, a man sat quietly in the shadows, watching, waiting. Emma didn't know his name yet, but soon everything would change. The wind carried a chill that afternoon. Oak Ridge, usually blanketed in golden calm, felt off the kind of shift you can't explain, but sense in your bones, like something was about to tip like a still surface just before it breaks. Emma walked alone. Classes had ended, and Sarah had been pulled into band rehearsal, leaving Emma to take the long route home by herself. She didn't mind the walk. The streets here were quiet, and the sidewalks cracked in just the right places to feel nostalgic, even if they weren't her memories. Back in Chicago, this would have been her freedom, her time to slip away from noise, from arguments, from being reminded that she came from a broken home. But Oak Ridge wasn't Chicago. As she turned onto Sycamore Lane, only a few blocks from the bus stop, she heard them before she saw them, footsteps 3 sets getting closer. "Hey, CEO Princess." Jason's voice rang out behind her, casual but soaked in something darker. "Slow down." Emma stiffened but kept walking. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. His voice was always louder than the others, cocky with that venomous edge boys sometimes carry when they've never been taught what strength really means. "Don't be rude," one of the others called. "Jason's being nice." Emma didn't respond. They caught up quickly. She felt a hand graze her backpack, mocking at first, then firmer. A tug. She turned slightly, and that's when Jason moved in front of her, cutting her off. "Where's your friend now?" he smirked. Emma's face remained calm, but her knuckles turned white around the strap of her bag. "I don't want any trouble." "That's good," he sneered, "'cause I just want to welcome you properly." She tried to step around him. He moved again. His 2 friends flanked her close now. The street was empty. No passing cars, no open windows, just the whisper of trees and the rustle of wind. Then suddenly Jason grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked it back. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to humiliate. Emma gasped. "You need to learn to answer when spoken to. I heard your mom thinks she can just buy up half the town for her company. Rich bitches need to learn respect." Emma looked up at him, her face pale but composed. Her voice came low and steady. "One day you're going to wish you hadn't done that." Jason laughed. "You threatening me?" "No," she said. "I don't need to." And then everything changed because from across the street, a voice deep, quiet, edged with steel, cut through the tension like a blade. "Let her go." 3 words. No shouting, no drama, just a calm command wrapped in warning. All 3 boys turned. Standing under the shade of a tall pine tree was a man in an old army jacket. His posture relaxed, his arms loose at his sides, but his eyes were locked onto Jason like a targeting system. Michael Hayes hadn't planned to intervene today. He had simply taken the long way home from the hardware store. His truck was parked half a block down. But the moment he saw Jason grab that girl, he didn't hesitate. Jason released Emma's hair slowly, like he wasn't sure if this was real. Michael took a step forward. Just one. That was enough. He didn't raise his voice. You touch her again, and we're going to have a problem you're not equipped to handle. Jason bristled. Who the hell are you? Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He stepped in closer than any adult usually would. His voice dropped to a whisper only Jason could hear. I know your type. You test limits. You think no one's watching, but someone always is. Jason opened his mouth, but Michael's hand moved. In one swift motion, he caught Jason's wrist, the one still half lifted in mock bravado. He didn't squeeze. He didn't twist. He just held it firm, unyielding. Jason froze. Michael leaned in. This is the part where you walk away and pray it ends here. For a moment, silence wrapped the entire street. Only the wind dared to move. Then Jason stepped back. His friends followed, confused eyes darting from Michael to Emma and back. They said nothing, just retreated, defeated not by violence, but by something more unnerving: control. Michael turned to Emma. You all right? She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yeah, I think so. Where do you live? Cedar Street. I'll walk you. They walked in silence at first. She clutched her bag tightly, glancing sideways at the man beside her. He didn't look like most dads. His hair was long, his face unreadable. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen worse. Much worse. Why did you help me? She asked finally. Michael kept his eyes forward. Because no one deserves to be treated like that. She swallowed. Do you know him, Jason? I've seen his kind before. He said simply, different uniforms, same arrogance. Emma looked down. I didn't want to make trouble. You didn't, he said. You were the target, he was the trouble. They reached her street. She turned to him a little steadier now. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Michael, she nodded. I'm Emma. I'm Emma Anderson. He gave her a small nod. Then before walking off, he said one last thing, his voice low, like a promise more than a warning. If anyone bothers you again, you let me know. And with that, he turned and walked back the way they'd come. Emma stood there for a long time watching him go. Her heart was still pounding, but the fear had been replaced by something else, something she hadn't felt in a while. Safety. She didn't know who he really was, but she would soon, and so would everyone else. The sun dipped lower over Oak Ridge, casting amber light across quiet streets and telephone wires that hummed faintly in the wind, the kind of light that made everything look softer, gentler, as if the world were trying to apologize for what had just happened. Emma walked the last few steps to her front door in silence. Her mother's sleek silver BMW wasn't in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. The porch light hadn't yet flickered on. For a second, she just stood there, still gripping her backpack like a shield heart, still finding its rhythm again. Her scalp tingled from where Jason had yanked her hair. Her body was whole, but her sense of self felt cracked. Then she remembered the man's voice. Steady, calm, like a lighthouse during a storm. Michael Hayes. She didn't know him, didn't know why he'd stepped in. But the way Jason had backed down, it hadn't been fear of getting caught. It had been fear of him. She reached for the doorknob, but paused when she heard footsteps retreating behind her. She turned. Michael was walking back down the block, hands in his jacket pockets, not looking back, not expecting anything. It wasn't heroism, it was duty. That was the difference. Later that night, Emma sat at the small kitchen table, stirring her soup absently, as her mother, Catherine Anderson, moved around the kitchen on a conference call laptop open on the counter. Her voice was firm, but measured as she discussed quarterly projections and market expansions. We'll need the acquisition papers by Monday. Yes, that's non-negotiable, Catherine said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She glanced up at Emma with an apologetic smile. Emma shrugged. This was normal dinner with one parent physically present, but mentally elsewhere. Catherine Anderson was a force of nature, tall, elegant, with sharp features that photographers loved and board members feared. At 42, she had become the first female CEO of Bluestream Technologies after fighting her way up through a sea of men who had underestimated her at every turn. The divorce had only made her more determined, more focused, especially after Emma's father had tried to take credit for her company's success in the press. "I'll call back in an hour," Catherine finally said, ending the call. She closed her laptop and sat across from Emma with a sigh. "I'm sorry about that. First week in a new market always means fires to put out." She studied her daughter's face. "You're quiet tonight." Emma shrugged. "Just tired." "School okay?" Another shrug. Yeah, Catherine didn't press. After the divorce, she had stopped asking too many questions, as if life had taught her that answers rarely brought comfort. But Emma, in her quiet way, tried. "There's a girl named Sarah. She sat with me at lunch." Catherine smiled faintly. "That's good. Friends make the hard days easier." Emma nodded. "Her dad helped me today. There were these boys." Catherine turned fully, now worry flashing in her face. "What kind of help?" "What boys?" Emma hesitated. "They were being jerks. One grabbed me. Her dad stepped in. Just told them to leave me alone." "They did." Catherine's jaw tightened. "Did he touch them?" "No," Emma said quickly. "He didn't need to. He just looked at them." Catherine exhaled slowly, setting down her water glass. "What's his name?" "Michael Hayes." Catherine paused, the name registering. "The mechanic on Pine Street, maybe." She reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her eyes searched Emma's face. "I know this move hasn't been easy. The press, the rumors. I just thought getting away from Chicago would help." Emma squeezed her mother's hand. "It will. It's just going to take time." Catherine nodded, but there was worry in her eyes, the kind that never quite went away. Not since the day the first accusations against Emma's father had surfaced, not since the reporters had started following Emma to school, asking her how it felt to be the daughter of a man who had betrayed his family and his company. "Mom," Emma said softly, "I'm fine, really." "I know you are. You're stronger than I was at your age." Catherine smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I have one more call at 9, and then how about we watch that baking show you like?" Emma smiled for the first time that evening, at the real one. "I'd like that." The next morning, Michael was under the hood of a rusted Ford Bronco when Sarah walked into the garage, backpack, slung, eyes narrowed with suspicion and curiosity. "I heard what happened," she said. Michael glanced up. "News travels fast. Emma texted me. Is she okay?" "Shaken, but she's tougher than she looks." Michael wiped his hands on a rag. "Most people are." Sarah tilted her head. "You really didn't say anything else to Jason? You just stared him down until he ran like a scared puppy." Michael gave her a dry look. "I wasn't trying to scare him." "But you did. Good." She smirked. "You can be terrifying, you know." Michael chuckled under his breath. The sound was rare enough that Sarah's eyes lit up. She stepped closer, suddenly serious. "Dad, are you okay?" Michael paused. The question caught him off guard, not because it was invasive, but because it had been a long time since anyone asked. "I'm fine." "Because you haven't stepped in like that since—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Not since the funeral, not since the move, not since the years they both tried to bury in silence and routine. Michael looked at his daughter, his anchor, and for a moment he wasn't the soldier or the mechanic. He was just a father trying to raise a child, right in a world that didn't always make it easy. "Some things," he said gently, "you don't walk past." That afternoon, a security camera at the corner grocery store buzzed quietly, storing away grainy footage of a tall man in an army jacket stepping between a girl and a teenage boy. The audio was faint, the moment short, but the image was powerful. A day later, someone pulled the clip. By the weekend, the video was circulating on a local Facebook group. "Man stops bullying with just a look." The comments came quickly. "That's Michael Hayes. He fixed my transmission last winter." "Did you see the way those boys backed off? We need more men like this." Others weren't so sure. "Isn't that the guy who moved here after his wife died? Keeps to himself too much. Something about him feels military. My cousin said he might have been special forces." The speculation grew like weeds, but Michael didn't know. He was in his garage, elbows deep in grease, the radio humming old country songs in the background. It would be Sarah who told him. She burst into the garage holding her phone. "You're viral." Michael looked up. "I don't have a fever." "No, viral, online. The video, you, Jason, Emma." He took the phone, watched in silence. When it ended, he simply handed it back. "People sure get excited over nothing." Sarah stared at him. "Dad, you're trending in Oak Ridge." "I'm a mechanic. I trend in carburetors." But there was a flicker of something behind his calm exterior, a shadow of unease. Not fear, not shame, but awareness. He had stepped out of anonymity, and the town had noticed. That evening, Emma sat on the porch steps of her house, hugging her knees. Sarah joined her, and for a moment they didn't speak. The sky was streaked with the colors of dusk, burnt orange, violet, soft pink. "He's different," Emma said finally. "My dad?" Sarah asked. Emma nodded. "He didn't just protect me, he saw me, like really saw me." Sarah smiled gently. "He sees everything, especially the people no one else looks at." Emma leaned her head on her knees. "Do you think people can tell who someone really is just by looking?" "Maybe," Sarah said, "but most of the time they wait too long to find out." In the distance, Michael stood on his porch once again, mug in hand, eyes scanning the street as always. He had no idea that a storm was beginning to form. But for now, the town was quiet, and in the quiet, healing had begun. Small towns have long memories and even longer tongues. By Monday morning, the video of Michael Hayes confronting Jason Hale had spread beyond Oak Ridge's social media circles. It reached the inboxes of school board members, church group chats, and a parenting Facebook group called Mothers for Morality, where it sparked both admiration and alarm. The footage itself was grainy. You could barely hear the dialogue, but it didn't matter. What people saw was enough. A tall, intimidating man confronting three high school boys, gripping one by the wrist, commanding silence with nothing more than posture and presence. And standing behind him, a frightened girl. That was all the fuel a rumor ever needed. In the teacher's lounge at Oak Ridge High, two faculty members stood beside the coffee machine, whispering over styrofoam cups. "Did you see that video?" The math teacher's voice barely carried across the room. "Of course, whole town's seen it. I heard he used to be Special Forces, Delta Force or something. I heard he was dishonorably discharged." "No, that's not it. My brother said he was a war hero. Afghanistan, some big classified mission." "Still, it's a bit much, isn't it? Confronting kids in the street." "You're not wrong. I mean, what kind of man gets involved like that and just walks away?" Outside the school, the gossip flowed with equal parts admiration and unease. At Dot's Diner, a group of local men sat around their usual corner booth, buttering toast and trading speculation. "Hayes has got a look about him." Carl Benson, a local contractor, gestured with his fork. "Wakes up before dawn, never says more than 5 words, keeps to himself. I've seen him run with a rucksack up the hill behind the cemetery." Another added, carrying weight like he's still in the army. "I don't trust it," muttered Frank Hale, the town sheriff and Jason's father. The table fell silent at his words. "Why's that?" Frank leaned back in the booth, gaze hardening. "Because men like that don't retire. They lie low. They hide and wait for something." A heavy silence fell over the table. Meanwhile, Michael kept to his rhythm. He rose before sunrise, brewed his coffee, tuned engines with calloused hands, and as always, he watched. But even he could feel it, the subtle shift in how people looked at him. The cashier at the hardware store smiled a little too politely. The woman at the gas pump lingered before pulling away. Teenagers glanced over their shoulders when passing his truck. He wasn't anonymous anymore. He was being studied. Sarah noticed it first at school. A boy in her history class leaned over and whispered, "Your dad beat up Jason." "No." "Did he threaten him?" "No." "Was he carrying a weapon?" "No." The questions didn't stop. Emma too felt the pressure. A girl in gym class snickered, "Better be careful around her. Her bodyguard might show up." Even the teachers seemed more watchful, hesitant, when calling on her as if her connection to Michael made her unpredictable. Emma hated the attention. But worse than that was the guilt. She hadn't asked for protection. She hadn't wanted to be the reason someone's life became complicated. At lunch, she sat with Sarah under the oak tree behind the school, away from the stairs. "This is my fault," Emma muttered, picking at the hem of her sleeve. "No, it's not," Sarah replied firmly. If he hadn't stepped in, but now your dad's the center of every whisper in town. Sarah looked out over the field, her voice quiet. He's used to whispers. This isn't the first town that's wondered who he really is. Emma blinked. It's happened before, Sarah nodded. We moved here 2 years ago. Before that, Texas. Before that, Georgia. White home. My mom's funeral made the news. Then the press dug into his military record. Then the neighbors started treating him like a bomb waiting to go off. Emma felt her throat tighten. He lost her in the war. No, he lost her after the war. She died in a car crash while he was still deployed. He got the call in the middle of a mission. They couldn't extract him for 3 days. Emma felt sick. I had no idea. Sarah's voice cracked just slightly. Neither did I. I was 9. They sat in silence, the weight of Michael's past pressing down like fog. Across town, Frank Hale was brewing his own version of a storm. The sheriff had watched the video a dozen times, jaw tight, brow furrowed. He didn't like what he saw, not because he cared about justice, but because his son had come home shaken, humiliated. He didn't even hit me, Jason had muttered, staring at the wall. Just grabbed my wrist like a vice. Didn't say a word, just looked at me. Frank didn't care that Jason had instigated the fight. He cared about optics, reputation control, and Michael Hayes was outside his control. So Frank started digging military records, public files. He even called in a favor from an old friend at the State Bureau. What he found unnerved him. Michael Joseph Hayes, born 1980, served with distinction, multiple tours commendations, Purple Heart Operation Canard Ridge classified missions. Frank frowned. Classified was a word he didn't like. He closed the file and made a decision. If the town wasn't going to see Michael Hayes for what he could become, then he would make sure they saw it. That night, Emma sat on her bed staring at the ceiling, earbuds and music playing softly. Her mother knocked gently on the door. Emma pulled out an earbud. Everything okay? Catherine's face was drawn with the fatigue that came from too many video calls and not enough sleep. Emma nodded. Catherine stepped in anyway. I heard something today at the grocery store about Michael Hayes. Emma sat up, heart suddenly pounding. They're saying he's dangerous, that he's hiding something. Emma shook her head. He's not. He's the opposite. I believe you, her mother said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. But that doesn't matter. In towns like this, truth always loses to comfort. Emma didn't respond, but her fists clenched. She didn't want Michael Hayes to become another casualty of fear. Down the street under the porch light, Michael stood alone. The town was quiet again. But this quiet was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was watching, waiting. The sky over Oak Ridge darkened earlier than usual the next day. Low-hanging clouds rolled in like gray bruises across the horizon, and the air tasted like rain. Not the cleansing kind, but the kind that presses down heavy on your shoulders, warning of something coming. Emma zipped up her hoodie as she stepped out of the school's side entrance. Sarah had stayed late for choir practice, so Emma was walking alone again. The hallways had felt tighter today. The stairs had lasted a little longer. Even the teachers had been different, less welcoming, more watchful, like they were waiting for her to erupt or unravel. Her boots crunched over the gravel sidewalk, her footsteps the only sound. Oak Ridge in the late afternoon was eerily quiet, like a film reel missing its soundtrack. She turned onto Birch Avenue, the shortcut that would shave off 5 minutes from the walk. That was when she heard them. Footsteps, laughter, male voices. Didn't think we were done, did you? A voice called. Emma stopped. Jason stepped out from behind a dumpster, flanked by 2 older boys she hadn't seen before. Bigger, broader one with a tattoo creeping out from under his sleeve. Not the usual dumb high school cronies. These were friends from outside school trouble, dressed in oversized hoodies and backward caps. Emma's spine stiffened. I'm not in the mood. She tried to step around them, but they moved to block her. Jason's face was different now. Not cocky, not amused. Tense, red-rimmed eyes, a twitch in the jaw. His pride still burned from what happened days ago, and humiliation had hardened into something colder. You think you're safe because some washed-up war hero stepped in, he sneered. I don't think about you at all. Emma kept her voice steady. The tattooed one chuckled. Feisty. Jason stepped closer. You made me look weak, he hissed, in front of the whole damn school. Even my dad's been writing me about it. Emma backed away. You did that to yourself. In a flash, Jason grabbed her arm, not playfully, not teasing. His fingers dug in hard. You need to learn when to keep your mouth shut, CEO princess. She struggled, yanked back. Let go! And then headlights. A low rumbling engine. Brakes screeched. The battered green olive pickup skidded to a stop right across the sidewalk, inches from Jason's back. Michael Hayes stepped out before the engine even finished humming. No words, no dramatic entrance, just a presence, a storm silent until the lightning struck. Jason spun around startled. The two older boys flinched. Emma stumbled backward, tears springing to her eyes, not from fear but from sheer relief. Michael walked forward, slowly, purposefully, his boots crunching over gravel. His gaze was locked onto Jason's expression, unreadable. He didn't move fast. He didn't need to. When he spoke, it was quiet. Step away. Jason didn't move, but his grip loosened. His jaw worked, trying to summon the arrogance that used to protect him. I'm not scared of you. Michael stopped a foot away from him. You should be. Then in one swift motion, Michael grabbed Jason's wrist, the same wrist from last time, and twisted just enough to force him to let go of Emma. With his other hand, Michael pushed Jason's chest back with firm pressure, not violent, but absolute. Jason stumbled and fell onto the pavement. The two older boys stepped forward, but Michael's eyes snapped toward them, sharp as broken glass. Try it. The words hung in the air, a promise more than a challenge. They didn't. Jason scrambled to his feet, clutching his wrist, humiliation burning across his face. You're going to regret this. Spittle flew from his mouth. Michael stepped forward, voice still low. I gave you a chance to be better. You refused it. Jason backed up, fear finally overtaking pride. Then they were both the sound of their running footsteps fading into the distance. Emma stood there shaking. Michael turned to her. You hurt? She shook her head, breath trembling. No, just scared. He nodded. That's normal. She wiped at her eyes. They would have, if you hadn't shown up. They didn't. That's what matters. Emma looked at him, eyes wide. Why do you keep helping me? Michael hesitated. Then, because the world doesn't need more people looking away. That night, word spread fast again. A second confrontation, another incident, this time with physical contact. Michael pushing a student. Jason bruised and ranting. His father, Sheriff Frank Hale, furious and ready to act. At the Hale residence, Frank slammed the door and tossed his badge on the kitchen table. This is it, he told his wife, voice tight with controlled rage. He put hands on my son. Your son attacked that girl, she replied quietly. Frank ignored her. Tomorrow morning, I'm filing an official complaint. Assaulting a minor. I don't care if he's a veteran or the damn president. Across town, Michael sat at his kitchen table in silence. Sarah stood in the doorway. I heard. Her voice was small. Michael didn't look up. I know. He's going to come after you. I know. Do you regret it? He met her eyes finally. Not for a second. Sarah stepped forward. You know this town. They don't forgive fast. Michael gave the faintest smile. They don't know the whole story yet. He stood, poured himself a glass of water, then paused. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Watch over Emma. This is going to get harder before it gets better. Outside, the night was darker than usual. The wind had picked up, and though the storm had passed, its echo lingered in every shadow, every whisper, every set of watching eyes. The town had seen Michael Hayes intervene twice. Once was mercy, twice felt like defiance, and defiance in small towns comes at a price. The video hit the town's group chats at 6:43 a.m. This time it wasn't grainy or taken from afar. It was crisp, clear security footage from a homeowner's camera, one of those doorbell devices with motion sensors and night vision. It captured everything: Jason grabbing Emma Michael's truck, pulling up the calm confrontation, the subtle wrist twist, the fall, and that final moment, Michael standing over Jason, firm but composed like a statue chiseled from restraint. The clip spread like wildfire. By 8:00 a.m., it had been shared over 300 times. By 9:00 a.m., a local blogger had posted a slowed-down version with dramatic piano music and the title, The Man Who Silenced a Bully with Just a Look. Again. And by noon, the town had stopped whispering. They were asking, who is this man? Inside a dimly lit barbershop, a man named Tom Kenny sat staring at the footage on his phone. He hadn't seen that face in over 15 years, but he remembered it. Tom was a former army medic. He'd served in Afghanistan, Kunar province, a hellhole carved into the mountains with fire and blood. And Michael Hayes had been the reason he came home. He stood up from the cracked vinyl chair, pushed open the barbershop door, and walked out into the street like a man on a mission. 10 minutes later, he was in front of the courthouse, talking to a woman with salt and pepper hair, dressed in sharp military blues. Brigadier General Dana Whitaker, another name from the past, another life Michael Hayes had touched. That afternoon, Emma walked into school to a hallway lined with stairs, but they felt different now. Not cold, not mocking, curious, respectful even. She didn't understand it until Sarah pulled her aside between classes. "You haven't seen the new video?" Sarah's eyes were wide. Emma shook her head. "No, my mom took my phone this morning." Sarah opened hers, showed her. Emma watched, heart racing, her breath caught when she saw herself in the footage, small cornered, afraid. Then Michael stepping into frame like a force of nature. But it wasn't just what he did, it was how he did it. Calm, controlled, powerful, without ever throwing a punch. Emma stared at the screen long after the video ended. The hallway felt different now. She felt different. That evening, her mother, Catherine, stood at the kitchen counter flipping through her tablet while stirring a pot of pasta. She froze mid-swipe. "What is it?" Emma looked up from her homework. Catherine turned the screen toward her. On it was a headline from a local news affiliate, "Hero or Threat, Who is Michael Hayes?" Beneath it was a still image of a younger Michael, bearded, uniformed, standing in a desert landscape. Behind him, a platoon of soldiers dust sunfire. Emma leaned in, eyes wide. Michael Hayes, 45, is a retired Delta Force operative who served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Catherine read aloud. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Purple Heart. His name appears in several now declassified missions, including Operation Kunar Ridge, where he reportedly rescued 5 soldiers under heavy fire and refused medical evacuation until his team was safe. She blinked. Her stomach turned not from nausea but awe. The man who had walked her home, the man who had stood in front of her without raising his voice, he had once carried bleeding men on his back through a storm of bullets. A few blocks away, Michael sat in his garage staring at an envelope he hadn't opened in years. His military discharge papers. Clean, honorable, folded with precision. Next to it was a photograph, faded but intact, his squad faces long gone or long forgotten. He traced one with his thumb, pausing on a familiar smile. He hadn't wanted any of this. He didn't want to be known. He just wanted to be useful. Behind him, Sarah stepped into the garage holding her phone. "People know now," she said quietly. Michael looked at her. "I figured." She crossed her arms. "They're not all happy." He smiled faintly. "They rarely are." She hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me everything?" He considered his answer. "Then because I didn't want my past to be your burden." Sarah's voice wavered. "It's not a burden, Dad. It's the reason I'm proud of you." He looked away. Sometimes pride was harder to carry than pain. The next morning, Michael opened the shop early. At 7:15 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. He expected a customer. Instead, he found a man in uniform standing at attention. "Permission to speak freely, sir," the man said. Michael blinked. Tom Kenny." Tom saluted. "It's good to see you, Sergeant Hayes." Michael frowned. "It's just Michael now." Tom stepped forward and handed him a small plaque. It was simple, engraved. "A thank you from a soldiers' reunion group." "We never forgot," Tom said, "even if you tried to." Michael stared at it for a long time. Then he reached out and shook Tom's hand. "Thank you," he said softly. At school, Emma sat beside Sarah in English class, still reeling from everything she'd learned. "Do you think he regrets it?" she whispered. "Saving me? Getting pulled into all this again?" Sarah smiled. "No, that's not how he's built." Emma leaned back in her chair. "They had no idea who he was." "No," Sarah said, "but now they do." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in bronze and lavender, Michael stood on his porch once again. But this time he wasn't watching in silence. People waved. A woman left a basket of muffins on his steps. A boy on a bicycle called out, "Thank you, sir." And then across the street, Emma Anderson stood outside her house, backpack over one shoulder, smiling at him like she'd known him forever. He nodded, just once a silent promise. He wasn't going anywhere. The knocking on Michael's door came at exactly 8:27 the next morning. Sharp, official, cold. He'd been expecting it. Michael opened it to find two deputies standing on his porch, one tall and lanky, the other stocky and tight-lipped. Both wore neutral expressions, the kind that had been trained, not born. "Mr. Hayes," the tall one began, "you're being asked to come down to the station. The sheriff would like to speak with you." Michael didn't blink. "Am I being charged?" "Not at this time, just a formal interview." He nodded once, calm, controlled. "Give me 10 minutes. Inside, Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, her hand still holding her cereal bowl. "Dad, what's going on?" Fear edged her voice. Michael grabbed his jacket, the green olive one worn at the cuffs, and looked her in the eye. "Just noise," he said quietly. "I'll be back before dinner." But Sarah knew her father well. He only wore that jacket when he expected a fight. At the sheriff's department, Frank Hale sat behind his desk like a man who'd been waiting years for this moment. His uniform was crisp, his badge polished, but his eyes, hard and narrow, told a different story. Michael entered the room like a shadow sliding across tile. Frank didn't offer a seat. Michael didn't ask for one. "You put your hands on my son," Frank said, words clipped. "I prevented him from hurting a girl. You laid hands on a minor. I stopped an assault." Michael's voice remained level. Frank stood. "You don't get to play vigilante just because you have a chest full of medals." Michael's tone didn't change. "You don't get to bury your son's violence behind your badge." The air between them turned electric. Frank exhaled slowly. "Jason says you twisted his wrist, shoved him to the ground. He was restraining a girl half his size. I intervened with control." "I've reviewed the footage. You did more than just intervene." Michael raised an eyebrow. "So have others, including veterans, parents, teachers." Frank's jaw tightened. "That's the problem. You've become a symbol, and symbols make people nervous." Michael stepped forward just enough to close the space. "I didn't ask to be anything but a father, a mechanic, a neighbor." Frank leaned forward. "Well, now you're a liability." The official notice was filed the next morning. Petition for misdemeanor assault, filed by Sheriff Frank Hale. The town exploded. Some rallied in support, posting hashtags, putting signs on lawns. "We stand with Michael. Protection is not a crime. A real hero doesn't need permission." Others were less welcoming. A few local business owners whispered that Michael's shop was too much attention. One canceled his appointment. A woman in the grocery store turned her cart around when she saw him near the bread aisle. The lines were being drawn, but Michael didn't flinch. He repaired engines. He paid his bills. And every morning he sat on his porch watching the sunrise with the same stillness that had once steadied a platoon in the mountains of Kunar. Emma was the first to offer testimony. When she heard about the charge, she told her mother she wasn't going to school. "I need to speak for him," she said, her voice firm in a way Catherine had never heard before. "Sweetheart, this is messy. Legal." Catherine's face was lined with worry. Emma's voice was steel. "He saved me twice, and they're trying to make him look like the villain." That afternoon, she showed up at the courthouse in a white blouse and jeans, her hands trembling as she signed the statement. The courtroom hearing was scheduled within a week, a procedural formality, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was the beginning of a battle not just for Michael's name, but for the town's soul. Catherine watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. When Emma finished giving her statement, Catherine pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Your father never would have stood up for anyone like that." Emma stiffened slightly at the mention of her father. "I'm not doing it for Dad. I'm doing it because it's right." Catherine nodded, pushing a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "That's exactly why I'm proud." As they walked out of the courthouse, Catherine's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "What is it?" Emma asked. "Board meeting, emergency session." Her voice held a note of steel. "Seems some of our investors are concerned about my involvement in local affairs." "Mom," Catherine's face hardened. "Don't worry about me. I've dealt with worse than small-town politics." She squeezed Emma's hand, her eyes fierce. "We defend what matters. That's what my father taught me before he shipped out. And your Mr. Hayes reminds me of him, a man who sees what needs to be done and does it without fanfare." Emma had never heard her mother speak about her grandfather this way before. There was a reverence there, a respect that cut through her usual corporate pragmatism. On the day of the hearing, the courthouse was full. Reporters stood outside. Parents filled the benches. Teachers whispered from the back row. Emma sat beside Sarah, her fists clenched in her lap. Catherine sat directly behind her, tall and composed, every inch the CEO, even in this small-town courtroom. The bailiff called the session to order. The prosecutor, a stiff-suited man from the county, rose and began with a cold-rehearsed opening. Michael Hayes may have a commendable military record, but that does not place him above the law. This is not Afghanistan, this is Oak Ridge. And no citizen, no matter how decorated, is allowed to take justice into his own hands. He played the video, just the beginning. Michael stepping out of his truck, Michael grabbing Jason's wrist, Jason hitting the pavement. The audio was muted, the context carefully cropped. Whispers rippled through the room. Sarah gripped Emma's hand. "They're twisting it," she hissed. Emma stood. The courtroom turned. She walked straight to the witness box, nervous, small, but her voice rang clear. "That video cuts off the part where Jason had his hands on me, where I begged him to let me go." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" "Emma Anderson, the girl he saved." The prosecutor started to object, but the judge gestured him down. Emma continued, "If it weren't for Mr. Hayes, I might have been seriously hurt. Or worse. He didn't attack Jason. He stopped him without violence, without anger. He treated me like someone who mattered." The courtroom fell silent. Then the door at the back creaked open, and in walked Brigadier General Dana Whitaker. The room straightened unconsciously. She was a presence, medals gleamed on her chest, her posture perfect, her gaze piercing. She took the stand. "I served with Michael Hayes in Afghanistan. He was one of the most disciplined, restrained, and honorable men I have ever known. He saved my life. He saved the lives of over 30 soldiers under fire. And when he came home, he asked for one thing." She paused. "A quiet life." The judge leaned forward. "And why are you here today?" She turned to face the courtroom. "Because it's time someone stood up for him." Frank Hale looked like a man chewing glass. His plan was unraveling. The town wasn't rallying behind him. They were waking up to truth, to the quiet hero they'd almost crucified. But then, unexpectedly, another figure rose from the gallery, Jason Hale himself. The room tensed. His father whispered harshly, trying to make him sit back down, but Jason ignored him. He approached the stand, shoulders hunched. Nothing like the swaggering bully who had tormented Emma. When he spoke, his voice was smaller than anyone had ever heard it. "I lied." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. I lied about what happened." He took a deep breath. "I was angry, embarrassed. He didn't attack me. He stopped me, and I deserved it." Frank Hale's face turned pale. Jason looked at the floor. "I thought if I made him look bad, it would make me feel stronger. But it didn't. It just made everything worse." He turned to Michael. "I'm sorry." Michael didn't nod, didn't smile, but his eyes softened just enough. The judge leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses. He looked out at the courtroom, not just the faces, but the atmosphere, the shift. Then he spoke. "What this courtroom has witnessed today is something rare. Not just testimony, but character. Not just defense, but grace." He turned to Michael. "Mr. Hayes, it is the opinion of this court that no crime has been committed. In fact, it appears the only crime is how long your courage has gone unrecognized." He tapped his gavel. Case dismissed. Gasps rippled through the room, then applause, then tears. Not everyone clapped, not everyone smiled, but something had broken loose, something more than silence, something like truth. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned clear and gold. Emma walked beside Michael down the steps. "You didn't have to go through all that," she said softly. Michael looked out over the town square. "I did," he said, "because silence lets the wrong story take root." Emma paused. "Are you angry at Jason?" He shook his head. "I'm proud of him." She frowned. "Why?" "Because it takes more strength to tell the truth than to pretend you were right." As they reached the bottom of the steps, a reporter called out, "Mr. Hayes, will you give a statement?" Michael stopped, turned, and with that same quiet voice that had stopped a fight, won a courtroom, and changed a town, He said, "I'm not a hero, I'm a father." Then he walked away. Catherine was waiting by her car phone pressed to her ear, clearly in the middle of a heated conversation. "No, you listen to me. I don't care what the board thinks about my public image. My daughter was assaulted, and Mr. Hayes prevented it from being worse. If you want to make this about shareholder value, then by all means explain to them how throwing a hero under the bus is good business." She ended the call, exhaling slowly. When she looked up and saw Michael and Emma approaching, she straightened. "Mr. Hayes," she extended her hand. "Catherine Anderson, I believe I owe you a proper thank you." Michael shook it. Their eyes met, two people used to carrying weight to making hard decisions. There was a mutual recognition there, an understanding that transcended words. "You raised a brave daughter," he said simply. Catherine smiled, a genuine one that softened her CEO mask. "She gets that from her grandfather. He was career military, never backed down from what was right. I see that same spirit in you." "Mom," Emma's voice held a note of embarrassment. Catherine laughed, a sound so rare these days that Emma stared in surprise. "I'd like to invite you and Sarah to dinner," Catherine continued. "Perhaps this weekend. It's the least I can do." Michael hesitated, unaccustomed to social invitations. "Just dinner," Catherine added, sensing his reluctance. "No fanfare." He nodded once. "We'd like that." As they parted ways, Catherine watched Michael walk back to Sarah, who waited by his truck. There was something about him that stirred memories of her own father, the quiet strength, the unflinching sense of purpose. She hadn't thought about her dad in years, had buried those memories beneath spreadsheets and board meetings. But now they surfaced, like old photographs long forgotten. That evening, Frank Hale sat alone in his office, badge on the desk before him. The defeat stung, but it was his son's betrayal that cut deepest. Jason had chosen Hayes over his own father. The town had chosen a stranger over its sheriff. His hand hovered over his service weapon, thumb tracing the polished metal. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Jason stood in the doorway, uncertain, bracing for rage. "Can I come in?" His voice barely carried across the room. Frank said nothing but nodded once. Jason entered, closing the door behind him. "I know you're mad." Jason stared at his shoes. "Mad doesn't begin to cover it." Frank's voice was dangerously soft. "You raised me to be tough," Jason continued, "to never back down, but all that did was make me a bully." Frank's jaw clenched. "I raised you to be respected." "No," Jason finally looked up. "You raised me to be feared. There's a difference." Frank stood chair scraping against the floor. "You have no idea what I've done to protect this family, this town." "Michael Hayes protected this town today." Jason's words cut through his father's anger. "He protected it from me, from what you were turning me into." The silence that followed was heavier than any Frank had experienced in his 20 years of law enforcement. It was the silence of truth finally spoken aloud. "Get out." Frank's voice was barely controlled. "Just get out." Jason left without another word. Frank remained standing, staring at the empty doorway, feeling something crack inside him, the first hairline fracture in a foundation he'd spent a lifetime building. Across town, Michael and Sarah sat on their porch in the gathering dusk. The past few days had been a storm, but now a strange calm settled over them. Sarah leaned her head against her father's shoulder. "You know what Mom would say if she were here?" Sarah's voice was soft against the evening air. "What's that?" "She'd say, 'See, Michael, you can't hide who you are forever.'" He smiled faintly. "She always did see through me." "That's because you're not as complicated as you think, Dad." Sarah straightened. "You're just a good man in a world that's forgotten what that looks like." From inside came the ringing of a phone. Sarah went to answer it, leaving Michael alone with the darkening sky. He thought about the dinner invitation, about Catherine Anderson, a woman who carried herself like someone accustomed to battles, though of a different kind than his. He thought about Emma with her quiet defiance. He thought about Jason breaking free from his father's shadow. And for the first time in years, Michael Hayes felt something shift inside him, a door long closed beginning just barely to creak open. Sarah returned, phone in hand, her face incredulous. "That was Mrs. Anderson," she said, "and she wants to know if we'd like to come to dinner tomorrow instead of waiting for the weekend." Michael raised an eyebrow. "She says Emma won't stop talking about you, and she'd like to have a proper conversation with the man who's apparently more impressive than any CEO she's ever met." A laugh escaped Michael, short, rusty, but real. Sarah's eyes widened at the sound. "What should I tell her?" she asked. Michael looked out at the town, his town in a way it had never been before. "Tell her," he said, "that we'll bring dessert." Oak Ridge felt different now. Not louder or busier, just quieter in a new way, like a town that had been holding its breath for weeks and finally exhaled. The whispers behind grocery shelves had ceased. The suspicious glances across gas station pumps had vanished. What remained was something slower, more tentative, like respect learning to walk. For the first time since the trial, Michael Hayes didn't feel like a question mark in his own community. He felt like a mirror, because in some way the town hadn't just judged him, it had judged itself. The morning after the hearing, Michael opened his garage early, the familiar routine of tools and engines offering a sanctuary from the newfound attention. The bell above the door jingled at 8:17 a.m. earlier than most customers ventured in. He looked up from an oil-stained carburetor to find Tom Kenny standing in the doorway, a military straight posture wrapped in civilian flannel. "Been a while, Sergeant," Tom said, eyes taking in the modest workshop. Michael wiped his hands on a rag. "Just Michael now." "Some things don't wash off," Tom replied, setting a cooler down on the workbench. "Brought sweet tea. Figured you've had enough handshakes and backslaps from folks who didn't know your name a week ago." Michael's expression softened slightly. He poured 2 glasses, handed one over, and they moved to the bench outside. For several minutes, they drank in silence, watching morning traffic pass, parents dropping kids at school, farmers hauling equipment, normal life continuing as if the town hadn't just been turned inside out. "Place looks good," Tom finally said, nodding at the garage. "Still needs work, but it runs." Tom chuckled. Story of every man over 40. Another stretch of quiet followed, comfortable in the way that only exists between people who have seen the same hell together. "That girl you helped," Tom began, "the one from the videos, she reminds me of that kid in Maiwand. Remember the one who kept showing up at the fence line?" Michael nodded once. Some memories didn't need voicing. "You did good, Mike," Tom continued, his voice dropping. "That's why we followed you back then. Not because of the damn medals, because you never hesitated when it mattered." Michael didn't respond with words. He simply looked at the horizon toward the hills that rimmed the town. But something in his posture loosened, barely perceptible, but there. "Some of the old unit is getting together next month. North Carolina. Nothing fancy, just guys who understand." Tom set his empty glass down. "You should come. I don't travel much." "Think about it." Tom stood. "They'd like to see you. Some of them need to see you." After Tom left, Michael returned to his work, but the morning's conversation lingered. For years, he'd avoided reunions, memorials, anything that pulled the past into the present. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. The concern in Tom's voice suggested something Michael hadn't considered, that his absence might have its own kind of weight. 2 days later, an elderly woman approached him in the post office line. Her silver hair was perfectly set, her posture straight, despite the cane she leaned on. "Mr. Hayes." Her voice was gentle but firm, like worn leather. He turned. "I'm Shirley Coburn. Taught kindergarten here for 30 years. My grandson Teddy was in the group that used to follow Jason Hale around, like ducklings." Michael waited, patient as always. Shirley held out a loaf of banana bread wrapped in foil. "Just wanted to say thank you, not just for Emma, but for showing our boys what a real man looks like. Someone who doesn't need to yell to be heard or hurt to be respected." He accepted the gift with a quiet nod. Later that evening, he left half of it on the Andersons' porch, wrapped in the same foil with a note tucked inside. "One good act deserves another. M." At Oak Ridge High, Jason Hale had returned to a different kind of spotlight. Some students mocked him quietly. High schoolers always do, but others watched him with something else in their eyes. Not fear, but a strange kind of respect. Not because he had fallen, but because he'd stood up again afterward. Jason didn't attempt to reclaim his throne. He walked slower now, spoke less, carried his shoulders differently. When he passed Emma in the hallway between classes, he nodded once, not out of fear, but from something that looked suspiciously like remorse. After a moment's hesitation, Emma nodded back. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. In AP English, Mr. Delane assigned group projects on the hero's journey. When Emma found herself partnered with Jason and 2 other students, the initial tension was palpable. As they settled around a library table, notebooks open, no one spoke. "So, Emma finally said, "Hero's journey. Pretty straightforward, right?" Jason looked up, relief flickering across his face at the broken silence. "Yeah, the whole transformation thing. Campbell wrote about it." The surprise must have shown on Emma's face because Jason added, "What I read. Sorry, No, it's fine." He rubbed the back of his neck. People assume stuff. Something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but a crack in the wall. By week's end, Michael's routine had been gently disrupted in a dozen small ways. People waved from their porches when he drove past. At the hardware store, Mr. Wilson refused payment for supplies needed to fix the Andersons' porch step. The local paper ran a feature about veterans in Oak Ridge, with Michael's story told simply but respectfully. Michael didn't speak at town hall. He didn't join Facebook. He didn't write editorials or accept podcast interviews. But word still spread that he'd been seen raking leaves for the widow down on Birch Street, that he'd fixed the school bus radiator without charging the district, that he'd paid for a set of tires for a single mom who never even knew his name. The town began to talk again, but this time it sounded different. It sounded like respect. One quiet Saturday, Michael parked his truck outside the Hale residence. Jason was in the garage fiddling with a busted bike chain, tools scattered around him in frustrated disarray. He looked up startled to find Michael standing at the entrance. Hey." Uncertainty crossed Jason's face. Michael handed him a small wrench set. "It's better than whatever that thing is you're using." Jason took it unsure. "Thanks." Michael started to walk away but paused. "You're not your mistakes, Jason. You're what you do after them." Jason swallowed hard. "I don't know how to fix what I did." Michael turned back. "Then start by fixing something else." He pointed at the bike. "That chain needs a master link, not just a reconnect. Back left pocket of that toolbox." He left Jason staring at the tools in his hands, the boy's expression, a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like hope. That evening, Jason biked past Emma's house. Not fast, not aimlessly. He was heading somewhere with purpose. The town was watching, but not the way it used to. It wasn't looking for someone to blame anymore. It was learning how to follow different examples. On Sunday morning, the town church filled more quickly than usual. Michael didn't attend. He never did. But Pastor Whitman had adjusted his sermon nonetheless, addressing a congregation bigger than it had been in months. This week, he began looking out at the faces with his kind, weathered eyes. "I saw a man stand for something. Not with fists or noise or pride, but with calm, with strength. And I remembered something I once read. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." A few heads turned toward the empty pew near the back where Michael usually sat before service started and left before it ended. Not out of disrespect, but out of quiet. Today the message still found its way to him through Sarah, who attended with Emma. At the high school, Principal Carter called an assembly. Not to talk about punishment, but to talk about courage. "Courage," she said from the stage, "isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who shows up when no one else will. It's about protecting others even when it costs you something. Sometimes courage looks like an olive green jacket and quiet eyes." No one had to guess who she meant. Emma sat in the front row, heartful Sarah beside her smiling. That evening, as golden light filtered through the trees, Michael stood beside his daughter in the garage. Sarah held a drill goggles on, sleeves rolled up. He adjusted her grip. "Pressure's good," he said. "Now ease into it." She drilled into the frame of an old bench they were restoring, wood shavings scattering. When she finished, she looked up. "How'd I do?" Michael inspected the angle. "Straight, strong, quiet." She grinned. "Just like you." He smiled back softly. "You're better." Later, as they worked side by side, Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression brightening. "Mrs. Anderson invited us to dinner tomorrow night. She says Emma won't stop talking about the English project." She glanced sideways at her father. "Should I say yes?" Michael continued, sanding the bench edge, his movements steady and precise. After a moment, he nodded. "Tell her we'll bring dessert." The Anderson home wasn't what Michael had expected. He'd imagined something formal, cold, sophisticated, a reflection of the CEO he'd glimpsed from a distance. Instead, the house Catherine had rented on the outskirts of Oak Ridge was warm, filled with books and art, with windows that let in streams of evening light. Catherine greeted them at the door, not in a business suit, but in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. The transformation was striking, like watching a fortress lower its drawbridge. "Welcome," she said, gesturing them inside. Emma's been cooking all afternoon," she insisted. The kitchen smelled of roasting chicken and herbs. Emma waved from behind the counter, cheeks flushed from the heat, looking younger and happier than they'd seen her before. "I hope you like rosemary," she called. "It's all we had." Sarah immediately joined her, and soon the two girls were laughing over something private, their heads bent together like old friends. Catherine led Michael to the living room, offering him a drink. "Bourbon beer. Or are you a wine man? Beer's fine." Michael took the bottle she offered, noticing the way her eyes assessed him, not with suspicion, but with genuine curiosity. "You know," Catherine said, sitting across from him, "I did some research on you after the trial." Michael tensed slightly. "Nothing invasive," she clarified. "Just what's public. Operation Kunar Ridge, the rescue mission, your commendations." "That's not who I am anymore." Catherine's eyes softened. "Isn't it I saw you in that courtroom? I saw the way you stood between my daughter and those boys." The uniform changes Michael. The man doesn't. He took a slow sip of his beer, unused to being seen so clearly. "My father was military," Catherine continued, surprising him. "Marines, 2 tours in Vietnam. He came back different, quieter." She traced the rim of her glass with one finger. "But he never stopped standing up for what mattered, even when it cost him everything." Michael raised an eyebrow. "He lost his job defending a Vietnamese family in our neighborhood from harassment. This was Kansas in the 70s. People didn't forgive easily." Michael studied her face, seeing something beyond the CEO exterior, a woman shaped by her own battles. "What happened to him?" he asked. Catherine's smile held a tinge of sadness. "He rebuilt, opened a small hardware store, taught me that reputation is what others think of you, but integrity is what you know about yourself." She raised her glass. "To the quiet ones who see what needs to be done." Michael nodded, touching his bottle to her glass. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, a connection forged in the spaces between words. Dinner passed in comfortable conversation, Sarah and Emma leading most of it, their friendship blossoming before their parents' eyes. As the night grew late, stars emerged in the sky, visible through the large windows. When Michael and Sarah prepared to leave, Catherine walked them to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said, her hand brushing Michael's arm lightly. "It's been refreshing to spend time with someone who says what they mean." Michael nodded. The food was good. Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. High praise from a man of few words. As they drove home in comfortable silence, Sarah studied her father's profile in the dashboard lights. "I like them," she finally said. "They're not what I expected." Michael nodded. "People rarely are." "Mrs. Anderson looks at you differently than other people do." Michael glanced at his daughter, raising an eyebrow. "Like she's actually seeing you," Sarah clarified, a small smile playing at her lips. "Not the medals, not the trial, just you." Michael turned back to the road, but not before Sarah caught the faintest color rising in his cheeks. "I'm 15, Dad, not blind," she teased. Michael cleared his throat. "Focus on your project with Emma." "Yes, sir," Sarah mock saluted, but her smile remained. Back home, while Sarah headed to bed, Michael stepped out onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered like distant campfires across the black expanse. For the first time in years, he felt the pulse of possibility, the whisper of a future beyond mere survival. The idea came to Sarah during breakfast 3 days later. She'd been watching her father teach Jason basic engine repair. In the garage, the patience he showed, the quiet authority in his instructions. It wasn't just mechanical skills being transferred. It was something more fundamental. "You should teach a class," she said, setting down her cereal bowl. "Like officially." Michael looked up from the truck manual he was studying. "I am teaching. Jason's learning fine." "No, I mean for everyone. Self-defense, but also the other stuff, the respect part, the standing up part." Michael returned to his manual. "I'm not a teacher." "But you are, Yao," Sarah persisted. "You taught your unit. You teach me. Now you're teaching Jason. And I've seen how you explain things to Emma. She gets it because you don't make her feel stupid for asking." That evening, Sarah placed a draft flyer on his workbench. White background, black letters, no design. Self-defense and respect class with Michael Hayes, 10:00 a.m., Oak Ridge Community Center. Open to all students and parents. No cost, no registration. Just show up. Michael stared at the page for a long time. Not because he doubted the idea, but because part of him had always believed his time to teach had passed. The only things he knew how to pass down were forged in fire, sand, and silence. You always said strength wasn't about hurting people, Sarah continued. Maybe it's time the town heard that from you. He studied her face so much like her mother's, but with his own stubborn determination in the set of her jaw. One class, he finally said. We'll see after that. So the flyers went up on school bulletin boards, on telephone poles, in coffee shops, and church vestibules. A few were torn down overnight. A few more were reposted by strangers who believed in what they represented. And then they waited. On the first Saturday, Michael arrived early. Keys to the rec center jangled in his hand, boots echoing on the hardwood floor. He carried no weapons, no whistle, just a duffel bag with training pads, a first aid kit, and a folded American flag, which he quietly pinned in the corner of the room. He rolled out the mats, checked the emergency exits, sat in a folding chair, and waited. For 20 minutes, no one came. Then the door creaked open. Emma stepped inside, wearing sneakers and a faded hoodie. I didn't want you to be alone. He smiled faintly. Thank you. 2 minutes later, Sarah arrived, then a boy from Emma's history class, then another student, then a mother with her daughter, then surprisingly, Tom Kenny still in his flannel and boots, carrying an old gym bag and a sheepish grin. By 10:15, there were 16 people in the room. Michael stood. All right, he said, let's begin. He started with breathing. Most people think strength starts in the fists, he said, voice low but steady. It doesn't. It starts here. He placed his hand over his heart. And here, he touched his temple. Michael demonstrated how to stand, how to fall without injury, how to deflect rather than attack. His movements were fluid, economic, nothing wasted or showy. He showed restraint, techniques, balance, control, how to create distance and signal danger. But more importantly, he taught why. Self-defense isn't about winning fights, he explained. It's about ending them before they begin. It's about protecting what matters without pride, without ego. The students listened, really listened. Michael didn't speak like a teacher from a manual. He spoke like someone who had lived every word. A woman in her 30s, Clara Wilson, stayed after class. She approached Michael hesitantly as he was rolling up the mats. Mr. Hayes, I just wanted to say, she twisted her wedding ring nervously. The way you taught about creating distance, it's important. Some people don't understand that. Michael nodded, waiting. My husband, ex-husband, he never understood about space, about boundaries. And she took a deep breath. I have twin boys. They need to learn from someone like you. Someone who understands strength isn't the same as power. Bring them next time, Michael said simply. We'll work on foundations. As the weeks passed, the class grew. 15 became 30, 30 became 50. A local gym donated equipment. Parents brought snacks. One teacher offered to keep the rec center open late for additional sessions. Michael never charged a cent. He refused interviews, turned down offers to expand the brand. This wasn't business. This was service, and service to Michael Hayes was sacred. Jason became a regular, arriving early to help set up, staying late to clean. Michael noticed how the boy watched him not with hero worship, but with focused attention, like someone memorizing a language they desperately needed to speak. One afternoon, Jason was helping Michael replace the transmission in an old Chevy when Frank Hale's cruiser drove slowly past the garage, the sheriff's gaze fixed on his son. Jason's shoulders tensed, his movements becoming mechanical. He hates this, Jason said, not looking up from the wrench he was turning. Me being here. Michael continued working. Why are you here? Jason paused. To learn engines, sons. Just engines, the boy's hand stilled. No, he took a breath. To learn how to be different. Michael nodded. Your father could learn too, if he wanted. Jason's laugh was hollow. He doesn't think he needs to learn anything from anyone, especially you. Everyone needs teachers, Michael said, reaching for a different socket. Even teachers. Later that week, Catherine Anderson appeared at the community center, slipping in quietly at the back of the class. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, hair tied back, a far cry from her boardroom appearance. When Emma spotted her, surprise and pleasure lit her face. After class, as people gathered their things, Michael approached her. Didn't expect to see you here, he said. Catherine smiled. I'm full of surprises lately, even to myself. She glanced around the room at the diverse group of people, teenagers, parents, seniors, all talking animatedly, exchanging experiences. You've created something special here. Michael shrugged slightly, just trying to be useful. It's more than that. Catherine turned to face him fully. You're building something these kids will carry with them long after they leave Oak Ridge. Trust me, I know. I still carry what my father taught me. Michael studied her face, seeing beyond the polished exterior to the steel beneath. Your father sounds like a good man. He was. Catherine's voice softened. He would have liked you. High praise. The highest. She hesitated, then added, we're having a bonfire tonight. Just me and Emma. Nothing fancy, just s'mores and stars. You and Sarah are welcome to join us. Michael considered the invitation, weighing old habits against new possibilities. We'll bring the marshmallows. Catherine smiled, a genuine one that reached her eyes. Perfect. As they walked toward their cars, neither noticed Frank Hale's cruiser parked across the street or the sheriff's cold eyes tracking their movements. The bonfire at Catherine's house became a regular event Friday nights, under the stars, with conversations that stretched into the late hours, while the girls roasted marshmallows and planned weekend adventures. For Michael, it was a slow awakening, like muscles long disused remembering their purpose. For Catherine, it was a rediscovery of parts of herself she'd packed away in the climb to corporate success. One Friday evening, as Sarah and Emma ventured inside for more cocoa, Catherine and Michael sat alone by the fire. Flames painted gold across their faces, shadows dancing. I always thought I'd raise Emma in the city, Catherine said, watching the sparks rise into the darkness. Corner office private schools, all the opportunities I never had growing up in Kansas. Cities have their advantages, Michael replied. Catherine gave him a sideways glance. You hate cities. They're busy, she laughed. That's diplomatic. Her expression grew more serious. The thing is, I'm watching her here. She's blooming, making real friends, finding her voice. Sarah too, Michael said. Having Emma around has been good for her. Catherine hesitated, then said, the board wants me back in Chicago permanently. Michael kept his eyes on the fire, his face unreadable. When? They've given me until the end of the month to decide. She picked up a stick, pushed a fallen log deeper into the flames. I've been working remotely, flying in for critical meetings, but they're not happy with the arrangement. They think I need to be present to lead effectively. What do you think? She sighed. I think I've spent 15 years proving I can do this job better than any man they've ever hired. I think I've sacrificed evenings and weekends and vacations. I think I've missed too many of Emma's important moments already. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, what would your father say? Catherine's eyes met his across the firelight. He'd say some things matter more than titles, that at the end, no one wishes they'd spent more time in board meetings. Their conversation was interrupted by the girls returning, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a shared recognition of choices that loomed on the horizon. The following Tuesday, Catherine sat in her makeshift home office facing her laptop screen. 5 board members stared back at her, expressions ranging from concern to thinly veiled hostility. The expansion into the Midwest was meant to be low-profile. Catherine, Bernard Miller, the CFO, spoke first. Instead, you've managed to become front-page news in 3 counties. For defending my daughter, Catherine countered, voice level. For involving Bluestream in local politics, Diane Winters corrected. Our investors are nervous about the association with what? Catherine interrupted. With a decorated veteran who stopped my daughter from being assaulted. With controversy, Bernard continued smoothly. The video, the court case, your very public support of this mechanic. Catherine's jaw tightened. His name is Michael Hayes. Whatever his name is, Diane waved dismissively, we need you back in Chicago. This remote work arrangement was temporary. The Midwest expansion is proceeding smoothly, and we need our CEO present for the Nakamura negotiations next month. Catherine felt something shift inside her, plates of armor rearranging. She'd fought for every inch of ground in this male-dominated industry. She'd sacrificed for this company. And now, for the first time, she found herself weighing those priorities against something else. Emma's happy here, she said finally. She's making friends, she's healing. I'm not uprooting her again so soon. Bernard exchanged glances with the others. No one's suggesting that, Catherine. Send her to boarding school. Hire a full-time nanny. But we need you back in Chicago. The suggestions hit Catherine like slaps. They saw her daughter as an inconvenience, a distraction from the real business of making money. It was the same attitude her ex-husband had taken. I'll be at the Nakamura negotiations, Catherine said evenly. But Emma stays with me, and I stay based here for now. I've delivered 3 consecutive quarters of record growth while working remotely. The results speak for themselves. Catherine, this isn't a negotiation, she cut in steel, entering her voice. It's a courtesy notification. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. She ended the call before anyone could respond, then sat back in her chair, heart pounding. In 15 years, she'd never spoken to the board that way. But watching Emma these past weeks, seeing her daughter stand up for herself, for Michael, for what she believed was right, had stirred something dormant in Catherine. A reminder of the woman she'd been before corner offices and stock options, before she'd learned to play by their rules. Her father would have been proud. Frank Hale wasn't adjusting well to the new order in Oak Ridge. His authority had been undermined, his judgment questioned. Citizens who once nodded respectfully now averted their eyes. Deputies who never questioned his decisions began to hesitate, ask clarifying questions, suggest alternatives. The worst was at home. Jason had moved into the spare bedroom at his aunt's house across town, refusing to speak to his father beyond necessary communication. Frank's wife had grown distant, spending more time at her sister's, avoiding the storm of his moods. Frank sat in his cruiser outside the community center one Saturday morning, watching people file in for Hayes' class. Among them was his own Deputy Wilson, with his teenage daughter. The betrayal stung like alcohol on an open wound. He started the engine intending to drive away, but hesitated when he saw Jason approaching the center wrench set in hand. The boy had been spending time in Hayes' garage learning basic mechanics, another betrayal Frank couldn't stomach. He rolled down his window. Jason, his son, paused, then walked over slowly, expression guarded. Sir, what do you think you're doing? Jason glanced at the community center, then back at his father. Learning. From him? Frank couldn't keep the venom from his voice. Jason squared his shoulders. From someone who knows how to control his strength, yeah. The words hit Frank like a physical blow. His hand tightened on the steering wheel. Get in the car. No, Jason's response was quiet but firm. I have work to do. What work? Frank's voice rose. Playing mechanic with some washed-up soldier. Jason's face hardened. Mr. Hayes is teaching me to fix things instead of breaking them. Maybe you should try it sometime. Before Frank could respond, Jason turned and walked away, shoulders straight, steps purposeful. Frank watched him go, something cold and hollow spreading in his chest. His son was becoming a stranger. Worse, he was becoming like Hayes. Over the following weeks, Frank's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He began drinking earlier in the day, keeping a flask in his desk drawer. His patrols became unpredictable, his temper shorter. Deputies exchanged worried glances when he slammed doors or snapped at minor infractions. The breaking point came when he learned that Jason had filed paperwork to transfer guardianship to his aunt until he turned 18. Frank hadn't even been consulted. That night, he sat in his empty house bourbon in hand service weapon on the table before him. On the wall hung his commendations, his certificate from the academy, photos from a career built on the belief that respect came from fear. All of it now seemed hollow, meaningless. His phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Coming by Saturday to pick up the rest of my things. Will be quick. Frank didn't respond. He just stared at the weapon, feeling the weight of failures pressing down on him. Something had to break. Something had to give. The next morning, bleary-eyed and unshaven, he drove to Michael's garage. The place was quiet, Michael alone working under the hood of an old Ford. Frank parked haphazardly, leaving the cruiser door open as he approached. Hayes, he called, voice rough from the night's drinking. Michael straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. He assessed Frank's state with a quick glance, the bloodshot eyes, the disheveled uniform, the hand hovering near his holster. Frank. Michael kept his voice level. What can I do for you? You can get out of my town. Frank stopped a few feet away, swaying slightly. You've taken everything else. My son, my authority, my respect. No one took those things from you. Michael didn't move, maintaining the distance between them. You lost them on your own. Frank's hand moved to his holster. You think you're better than me? Some broken-down soldier playing hero. I think we're both broken in different ways. Michael's eyes never left Frank's face. The difference is I'm trying to put the pieces back together. You're still breaking things. Frank's fingers brushed his weapon. My son used to look up to me. He still could, Michael said quietly, if you gave him a reason to. Something flashed in Frank's eyes, pain, rage, grief all tangled together. His hand closed around the grip of his gun. Frank! Michael's voice sharpened. Think about what you're doing. I've thought about nothing else for weeks, Frank's voice cracked. You took everything. Your son needs a father, not a martyr. Michael took a careful step forward. Whatever you're thinking, this isn't the answer. Frank's hand trembled on his weapon. For a moment, the garage was silent except for the ticking of cooling engines and the ragged sound of Frank's breathing. Then slowly his hand fell away from the holster. His shoulders slumped, the rage draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered, all the bluster gone. Michael regarded him for a long moment, then stepped to a workbench and picked up a wrench. Start here, he said, offering it to Frank. Help me with this engine, one step at a time. Frank stared at the tool, then at Michael, confusion replacing anger. Why would you help me after everything? Michael's expression remained steady. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Even you. Frank took the wrench, his hand still unsteady. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't friendship. But it was a beginning. For the next hour they worked in near silence, Michael giving simple instructions, Frank following them with mechanical precision. By the time they finished, something had shifted between them. Not trust exactly, but a fragile truce built on shared labor. As Frank prepared to leave, Michael spoke one last time. Talk to your son, not as the sheriff, as his father. Frank nodded, the gesture small but significant. He drove away more slowly than he'd arrived, the cruiser moving steadily down the road. The following Saturday's class was the largest yet. 62 people filled the community center, ranging from elementary school children to senior citizens. Michael moved through the group with steady attention, adjusting stances, demonstrating techniques, always patient, never raising his voice. After class, as people were gathering their things, Emma approached him. Would you mind if we did a demonstration, she asked, like a showcase to show what we've been learning? Michael looked skeptical. It's not about showing off. It's not about that, Emma insisted. It's about showing people that strength can bring a community together instead of tearing it apart. Sarah joined them, nodding in agreement. We could make it a community event. Food, music. Let people see what this is all about. Michael studied the two girls, seeing the earnestness in their faces. He'd spent most of his life avoiding attention, keeping to the shadows. But something had changed in Oak Ridge, and perhaps in him as well. One demonstration, he conceded. Nothing flashy. The girls exchanged triumphant grins. The idea quickly grew beyond their initial concept. Catherine joined the planning committee, leveraging her business connections to secure donations and publicity. The local paper ran a front-page story about the event, featuring a photo of Michael and his growing class of students. For once, he didn't shy away from the camera. Local businesses donated food and prizes. The school band volunteered to play. Even the mayor planned to attend. What had started as a simple demonstration was becoming a celebration of the changes that had taken place in Oak Ridge over the past months. 2 days before the event, Jason approached Michael after class, his expression serious. I want to do something different for the demonstration, he said, not just the physical techniques. Michael raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I want to show how to stand up to bullies without fighting, how to support each other. Jason's eyes held a determination Michael hadn't seen before. I was thinking maybe I could work with some of the younger kids, show them how to form a circle around someone who's being targeted. Michael studied him for a long moment. You've thought about this. A lot, Jason admitted. It's what I wish someone had done for me before I became what I became. Michael nodded. Show me what you're planning. The day of the showcase dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring Saturday. The community center was transformed, mats laid out in the center, chairs arranged in concentric circles around them, tables laden with food along the walls. By 10 o'clock, the place was packed, the buzz of conversation filling the air. Michael moved through the crowd quietly, nodding to familiar faces, stopping occasionally to shake a hand or answer a question. He wore his usual olive jacket over a clean white t-shirt, looking much as he had on that first day at the bus stop. But something was different, a lightness to his step, a clarity in his eyes. The weight of the past still rode his shoulders, but it no longer defined him. Catherine found him near the entrance, elegant in simple jeans and a blouse, her CEO armor nowhere in sight. "Nervous?" she asked with a small smile. "Not for me," he replied. "For them." He nodded toward the center where the students were gathering, including Sarah, Emma, and surprisingly, Jason. Catherine followed his gaze. "They'll be fine. They had a good teacher." "The best," Emma added, appearing beside them. She hugged her mother, then after a moment's hesitation hugged Michael too. He returned it awkwardly, still unused to such displays but sincere. The demonstration began with the younger children showing basic falls and rolls, their faces serious with concentration. Parents applauded enthusiastically, cameras flashing. Then came the teenagers demonstrating more advanced techniques, wrist escapes, stance work, basic holds and releases. Sarah and Emma paired up for a choreographed sequence, showing how a smaller person could redirect a larger attacker's energy. The crowd murmured in appreciation as Emma, smaller by several inches, successfully evaded Sarah's controlled attacks. Then Jason stepped forward and the room quieted. Everyone knew his story, knew the path that had led him here. He stood in the center, looking briefly toward the back of the room, where his father stood, arms crossed, but present. "I want to show something different." Jason began, his voice steady despite the nervous flush on his neck. "Not just physical defense, but moral courage." He gestured to three younger boys from the class who joined him in the center. With patient guidance, he showed them not fighting techniques, but how to stand together against a threat, how to use their voices, how to support each other. "True strength," Jason said, and addressing the crowd directly, "isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting each other. I learned that the hard way." His eyes found Michael's in the crowd, then Emma's, acknowledging debts that could never fully be repaid but could be honored through action. The applause was spontaneous and genuine. Even Frank at the back of the room uncrossed his arms to join it. As the formal demonstrations concluded, Michael stepped into the center. The room fell silent, everyone waiting. He rarely spoke at length and never to crowds. "I'm not one for speeches," he began, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. "But I want to thank you all for coming today. What you've seen isn't about fighting. It's about standing firm when it matters, about protecting what's valuable without becoming what you're fighting against." He paused, looking around the room, meeting eyes that had once regarded him with suspicion, but now held respect. "Someone once told me that the true measure of strength isn't what you can destroy, but what you can preserve, what you can build, what you can heal." His gaze lingered on Catherine, then Sarah, then the students gathered around the edges of the mat. "This town has taught me that healing isn't a solitary act. It's something we do together, one day at a time." The silence that followed was profound, weighted with collective understanding. Then from the back of the room, Frank Hale began to applaud. Slowly, others joined in the sound swelling until it filled the space. Michael stepped back, uncomfortable with the attention, but accepting it with a small nod. The formal event transitioned into a community gathering, people mingling, sharing food, conversations flowing across previous boundaries of status and history. Catherine found Michael at the edge of the crowd, offering him a plate of food. "That was quite a speech for a man of few words," she said, her eyes warm. "Had to make them count." He took the plate, their fingers brushing. Neither pulled away immediately. "You've changed this town," Catherine said quietly. Michael shook his head. "The town changed itself. I just reminded it how." "Well, you've certainly changed me." Catherine's voice softened. "Reminded me of things I'd forgotten. Good things. The best things." Her hand found his, tentative but deliberate. "Things my father taught me about integrity, about courage, about what matters when everything else falls away." Michael looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face, strong, determined, beautiful, in ways that had nothing to do with conventional standards. "Your father would be proud of you," he said simply. "And Sarah's mother," Catherine asked gently, "what would she think of all this?" Michael was quiet for a moment, considering. "She'd be happy," he said finally. "She always said I needed to let more light in." "And have you?" His answer was in his eyes, in the slight curve of his lips, in the way his hand tightened around hers. Across the room, Sarah and Emma exchanged glances, noticing their parents' clasped hands. Emma gave a small thumbs up. Sarah grinned in response. Jason approached them, a plate of food in hand. Mind if I join you? The girls made room for him without hesitation. Progress one step at a time. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, the crowd thinned, but the sense of community remained. People who had once been strangers now parted as friends, planning future gatherings, exchanging phone numbers, building connections that would last beyond this single day. Michael and Catherine stayed until the end, helping with cleanup, their movements around each other, comfortable now, familiar. As they folded the last table, Michael paused. We should do this again, he said. Not just the demonstration, the coming together. Catherine smiled. I'd like that. Maybe make it a monthly thing. The Oak Ridge Community Gathering. Has a nice ring to it. Michael stacked the final chair. Speaking of gatherings, Sarah mentioned you two were thinking of staying in Oak Ridge. Permanently. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. The girls talk too much. They're teenagers. It's their job. She laughed, then grew more serious. I am considering it. The board isn't thrilled, but they'll adapt. Emma's happier here than she's been in years, and she hesitated, then met his gaze directly. There are other reasons to stay. Michael nodded, understanding all she wasn't saying aloud. Oak Ridge has a way of growing on you. It's not just the town, Catherine said quietly. They stood close now, the empty community center quiet around them, the evening light slanting golden through the windows. Catherine, Michael began, his voice lower than usual. I'm not good at this, at new beginnings. Neither am I, she admitted. My track record speaks for itself. Then we'll take it slow, he said. One day at a time. One day at a time, she agreed, her hand finding his again. Starting with today. Outside, Sarah and Emma waited by Catherine's car, pretending not to watch through the windows. When their parents emerged, walking closer together than before, the girls exchanged satisfied smiles. Told you, Sarah whispered. Dad never could resist a woman who stands her ground. And Mom always had a thing for the quiet, competent type, Emma replied, even if she didn't know it. 3 weeks later, Catherine sat at her desk reviewing the final paperwork. The decision had been easier than she expected. After 15 years of climbing corporate ladders, of breaking glass ceilings, she had found something in Oak Ridge that no corner office could provide. The letter of resignation was brief but clear. She would step down as CEO of Bluestream but remain on the board. And she would head the new Midwest regional office based in Oak Ridge. As she signed her name, she glanced at the photo on her desk, herself at 10, sitting on her father's shoulders at a county fair, his Marine Corps tattoo visible on his forearm. Next to it now stood a newer photo, Emma, Sarah, Michael, and herself at the community center, surrounded by students of all ages. She sent the email, then closed her laptop with a sense of finality. When she stepped outside, Michael was waiting by his truck, Sarah and Emma already inside. Ready, he asked. Catherine smiled. More than I thought I'd be. As they drove toward the lake for a weekend camping trip, Michael's idea, surprisingly, Catherine watched the town of Oak Ridge roll past. The streets were the same, the buildings unchanged, but the spirit that moved through them had transformed, awakened to possibilities beyond suspicion and fear. And at the center of it all, a man who had come home from war, seeking only quiet, only peace, had found something more valuable, a community, a purpose, and perhaps, in Catherine's steady gaze and Emma's growing strength, a second chance at family. That night, as stars appeared overhead and the girls' laughter echoed from the campfire, Michael and Catherine stood at the lake's edge. The water reflected the moon in rippling silver, the air cool and clean. I got a call from Tom yesterday, Michael said. They're doing a memorial service for James Cooper next month, part of our unit in Kunar. Catherine glanced at him. Are you going? I think so. He looked out over the water. Some things you don't walk past. She smiled, hearing his own words coming back to him. I'll go with you, if you want. Michael turned to her. In the moonlight, his features were softer, the hard lines of experience gentled by something new. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. I'd like that, he said. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Behind them, Sarah and Emma's voices rose and fell in easy conversation, the sound of a friendship that had brought them all together. I've been thinking about names, Catherine said after a while. Michael raised an eyebrow. For the community center program. She turned to face him. What about the Quiet Strength Project? He considered it, then nodded once. It fits. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight in this moment, Michael Hayes was not a soldier, not a widower, not a symbol. He was simply a man who had found his way back to the world of the living, one quiet lesson at a time. And as Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, he realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to stand alone, but to let someone stand beside you.